It's good to see everyone tonight. It's good to see you. We got several out of town traveling. We pray for their safety. But those of us that are still here, it's good to see you. Good to see your face. I'm happy that you get the opportunity we get to study together and worship God together like this. If you be turning to your Bibles to 1 Timothy 5, that's what we'll be looking at tonight. Here is Devin's notes up here. So if any of y'all want to steal a sermon, they're right there. A little note card. To repeat something that Devin said this morning, and I wanted to really hit hard too, as well as our meeting next week. I'm really excited about it, and obviously I'm not going to fuss at the Sunday night crowd for not being there every night. But I do believe that gospel meetings have gotten a different purpose than the tent meetings that we've seen in the past. I think often when we think about gospel meetings, we think about evangelism. But I think today gospel meetings work a little bit differently. I think they're a lot more about edification. And I think they're about this group here, and I think it's about getting that one big spiritual boost from that week to keep us going and really light the fire under us. So please be here for that. And not only that, but I grew up hearing Mr. Bryan my whole life at Prattmont. And if you ever want to thank anyone for me or get on to anyone for me, Bryan would be the person to do it. And I was little, and Bryan would go up to me and say, "Hey, Andrew, I'm going to give you a talk for our boys' class." And he gave me these talks to do at boys' class since I was real little. And I got older, and he's like, "Come on, Andrew, you're going to do a sermon here." And so Mr. Bryan really got me going. And I think probably like most of y'all that grew up with hearing the same preacher your whole life, when I read the Bible by myself, I read it in his voice. I heard him read so often that when I read to myself, I hear Mr. Bryan's voice reading it to me. So he's very special to me, and I think he's going to be special to y'all as well. And in some strange way, I feel like I'm getting to share Mr. Bryan with y'all. Mr. Bryan has a talent from God, and one of those talents is that he can take something so hard, and he can make it so simple and so easy to understand. And so I'm excited for that next week, so please be here. You're going to get something out of it, and you're not going to go home regretting it any night. So thank you so much for thinking about that and prayerfully thinking about this meeting, and I think it's going to be wonderful for all of us. And as well, we're having that prayer meeting at 9 Saturday morning, 30 minutes in the back. So please be for that as well. Now, after talking about all that, I've been reading Timothy a lot in several studies that I've been doing throughout the week. And 1 Timothy keeps on coming up. And I've gone through this book 3 times this past month with different people. And I keep on getting to chapter 5. And every time I get to chapter 5, I learn something more than I learned the last time that I studied chapter 5. And every time I get to chapter 5 when I'm reading this book, I'm thinking that this chapter actually is kind of, not that anything is thrown away, but it's the chapter that's not as important as the other chapters. That's how I used to feel about this. And I go, okay, well, this is the chapter about taking care of widows that are fully supported by the church. And we just kind of read through it, and then we get done. But then every time I'd study it, I go, wait just a second, this is a really good point right here. Wait just a second, this is a really good point right here too. End up being in all my studies, I ended up spending more time on chapter 5 than I would spend on chapter 4 because there's just so much in here. Chapter 4 of 1 Timothy is this theme of honor. That, okay, you're going to honor this person because they deserve it. You're going to honor this person because they deserve it. You're going to honor this person because they need it. When you think about the word honor, I don't want you to think about knights in shining armor and they have an honor and that sort of thing. When you think about honor, I want you to think about respect. And I want you to think about fulfillment. So we use the word honor, like, well, I honor this person because I revere them or I respect them. We also use the word honor when we talk about fulfilling an agreement. You and me make a deal, and something goes wrong, or maybe something goes strange, and I come back to you and I say, hey, I don't want you to worry. I'm going to honor our deal, or I'm going to honor our agreement. So at the core of honor, one part of it is about fulfilling responsibilities. I have a responsibility to this person. I have a responsibility to this agreement. So I honor that person or I honor that agreement by fulfilling those responsibilities. And that's chapter 4. I'm going to first start and give you a brief outline of what the sermon's going to be and what we're going to be talking about tonight. The honor thing here in 1 Timothy 5. You see, number 1, he's talking about honoring your widows. And I say your widows because later at the end of the section, he's going to make you take possession for these women in your life. He says they're your widows if you have widows. These women are your responsibility, and you need to honor them in that way. The second one, before I get to the second one, there's 2 points I have to hit when I hit this one, which is one, we have to talk about the qualifications for a church-supported widow in 9 through 10, and then problems with supporting a younger widow and the problems that arise out of that. Number 2 is honor your church responsibilities and honor the church in that way. And that's only one verse, but I need to cover that as well. The third thing here is honor the elders. And he talks about that in verse 17 and 21. And I have to reach into chapter 6 to finish the subject. But the last one is honor your masters, talking to bondservants. So there's our 4 points right here. In this section, he talks about honoring your widows. He talks about honoring the church, honoring your elders, and finally, honoring your masters as a bondservant. And I think we're going to get a lot out of this about fulfilling our responsibilities to these people. So let's start at the very beginning. Verses 3, we'll read through 8. Chapter 5, 1 Timothy, verse 3, honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Now she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. First here, just to put us in context, what are we talking about? We're talking about widows that need to be fully supported by the church. That's who we're talking about here. We're talking about, go back into Acts when we meet Stephen and Philip at 7 and 8 and 9. We meet them and we see that there's a distribution given by the church, the early church there. And we've heard the story about what happens in Acts. You have a lot of people, a lot of Jews come into town for Passover. They're only planning on staying for 50 days to Pentecost, but the apostles come and they reveal them the gospel. So what do all these people want to do? Well, they want to stay. The problem is they only have provisions for the 50 days that they were going to be there, a little over a month. So now they're going to end up staying more than over just a month. So as you see people like Barnabas go and they sell land and they lay this money at the apostles' feet to meet the needs of the people that are going to live there. What happens, we see when Stephen and Philip come on the scene, is that there's women, widows, that are getting neglected in that distribution. That they're going around from house to house to the different Christians, and they're giving them food or they're giving them money so that they can eat that day, and somehow widows are getting neglected. Now the next thing we see widows being brought up again is here. And so what we're talking about here is women that need to be supported by the church because they have no one else to support them. And we think about that as well. So we're thinking about church support here. When we honor our widows here, he says, first, let children and grandchildren repay their parents. Number one, whose responsibility is it to take care of a widow, or I would even say, an older man? It is the children and grandchildren's responsibility. Number one, it falls in your hands to take care of your elderly family. And he even goes into more detail there at the end when he talks about your household in verse 8. You're supposed to take care of your household, the people that you're responsible for. It's obvious to me, the children and the parents, that we need to repay our parents, especially in their older age, because of all the things that they've done for us. And you think about what your mom and what your dad did to you, especially when you were younger. We went to Cracker Barrel today, and someone's kid had destroyed the table, right? They had food everywhere and all this kind of stuff. And I used to be that little kid that destroyed the table and threw food and everywhere. Well, guess who usually cleans that up, or who's supposed to clean that up? The parents end up cleaning that up, don't they? And when you're in trouble and when you're misbehaving, who has to help you then? Well, it's your parents. And you think about all these different things that your parents had to do for you when you couldn't take care of yourself. Well, the thought is when your parents get to the point that they can't take care of themselves, who's going to take care of them? God says it's you. You're supposed to repay them and show piety at home. And piety is a word that means revere. Revere, give them the reverence they deserve. I thought this was interesting, though. He doesn't just say children, does he? And grandchildren. Of us here that are grandchildren, you too have a responsibility to take care of the widows in your family. Or in general, take care of those that are elderly, if we talk in a broad sense. Grandchildren, it's your responsibility as well to meet their needs and to take care of them in that way. I got to be blessed enough to grow up with both sets of grandparents in Prattville. And on Sunday afternoons, I go to my grandmama's house, and grandmama in between services, we would go, and she'd play with me out in the garden. She helped me dig up worms. I don't know, for some reason I love doing that. She'd get out there and she'd get muddy with me, and then she'd clean me up and send me back to church, right? Well, she'd go with me. She'd take me to church. That's what I should say. My Nana, I used to go all the afternoons. I'd ride my bike down there to go swimming at Nana's house. Nana took care of me, and she fed me. And I'd say, Nana, can I spend the night? And Nana say, okay. And so Nana ended up making me breakfast the next morning, right? So even grandparents of us that experienced that, they took care of us when we couldn't take care of ourselves. And so what do we got to do? We have to repay them. It is our responsibility to take care. I understand there comes to a point as well when we do have to go to assisted living homes to take care of our parents. And that happens. We get to a point where we just physically cannot meet the needs that they have in that condition. And I think that's fine, and I think that's within our resources and our ability to do. What I hate to see, though, is when nursing homes or assisted living homes become a place just to dump our parents so we don't have to worry about them anymore. That's when we've fallen into the sin idea here again. That we still, though, are responsible for them. And we need to go and we need to visit them and we need to talk to them and we need to make sure everything that they need is being met. That it is our responsibility here. Number one, it is our responsibility to take care of our parents and especially here our widows. Why do we do this? He says because it's good and acceptable before God. There's some people here I know that are really struggling right now taking care of their parents. And there are some people here that are really struggling right now taking care of their grandparents. And let me give you this encouraging thought from Paul. When God looks down at you and he sees you take care of these people, God looks down and he says, you know what? That is good. That is a good and acceptable thing. This is something that makes God happy. And this is something that God sees while the gospel is living in their life because they're meeting these needs. Now, alternatively, it goes the other way. If anyone who does not provide for his own, this is what we see here in verse 8, he says this about them. They have denied the faith, and they are worse than an unbeliever. If you're the type of person that doesn't take care of your household, if you're the type of person who doesn't take care of your widows in this situation, in this context, what are you? If you're not trying to take care of these people, what are you? You're like somebody who's denied the faith, and Paul says, you're worse than an unbeliever. You're worse than an unbeliever. I was trying to think to myself, what is worse than an unbeliever? Who's someone who's worse than an unbeliever? And maybe some of y'all can enlighten me after this. I don't know. How can you be worse than an unbeliever? I guess there is someone that's worse than an unbeliever. I go back to the verse. It's someone that doesn't take care of their parents. That's someone who's worse than an unbeliever. And that's the way that God feels about this when we neglect our family in this way. And I know that there's a lot of hard situations. And I know that there's times when we can't meet all those needs. And I know that those are those situations. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about willfully neglecting the people in our household. We become worse than an unbeliever and we're not good and acceptable for God. Now, this is what we're talking about here. What if a woman is left alone, a widow that's left alone here in this passage? Well, she can't trust in her family, either because her family has neglected her, or maybe her family is gone. Her family has left this earth and she has no family. So who does she trust in? Well, she trusts in God. And this is a great line here. If we read this again here in verse 5. Now, if she is really a widow and left alone, she trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. So this is a woman who realizes she has no family, she has no one to take care of her, and her faith is so great, she thinks, you know what? I'm going to trust in God, and He's going to meet my needs. And what we see in this passage is that God follows through. You have a woman here that trusts in God, and God's going to follow through and meet her needs. What's examined here of her trusting in God, what exemplifies her trusting in God? It's the next phrase, her prayer. Her prayer life, she prays day and night because she trusts in God. And this is an overwhelming application we can make about everybody. If you trust in God, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be praying day and night. If you don't trust in God, what are you going to be doing? What are you not going to be doing? You're not going to be praying day and night, are you? Our prayer life is a reflection of our faith and trust in God. And Paul brings that up here. And again, when I look at this, there's just so many little applications you can pull out of a chapter like chapter 5. And so we have to honor our widows in this way. But she who lives in pleasure in verse 6, she says that she's already dead while she lives. So you have alternatively, not the woman who trusts in God, but the woman that lives for pleasure. And what does he say about her? She's already dead. She's already dead. What's the point of all this? She's not trusting in God, and you are already dead. And again, I'd say that about anybody. If you don't trust in God, how are you living your life? Well, you're living a dead life. There's nothing going for you. There's nothing going on for you. The first time you run into trouble, who are you going to lean on? Yourself? Good luck with that. That isn't going to get you anywhere. But if you trust in God, you can live. And this is what God does for the widow here in 1 Timothy 5. So let's look at these qualifications in 9 through 10 for a woman that can be supported by the local work. It says here in verse 9, "Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work." If we're thinking about qualifications for a woman to be taken in the number this way, the first qualification has already been given before verse 9. Do you know where it is? It's verse 7. That she might be blameless. Why am I commanding these things? So she's blameless. Something I love about this, if we go back to chapter 2 and we go back to chapter 3, what's the very first qualification of an elder? Blameless. And so we're going full circle here. We're coming back to this thought. What do we need to be as church members? Well, we need to be blameless. That no one in the world or here points at us and says, you know what? This is the life that they live. They live a dead life. They can't do that because you're blameless. We continue on. This is not someone under 60 years old. And we'll bring this up again in just a second with the problems with supporting someone who's under 60 years old. It says that she's been the wife of one man. She's been reported for good works. She has raised children. She's lodged strangers. That's hospitality. She's washed the saints' feet. She's relieved the afflicted. And she's diligently followed every good work. This is the type of woman that we're talking about here. And again, I really didn't want to do a sermon on supporting widows. That's not where I'm trying to go with all this. What I'm trying to go with all this is what you can glean out of passages like this. This shouldn't just be qualifications for a woman that's taken into the number. This should be qualifications for women as members of the church in general, shouldn't it? A lot of these things in general, and obviously we don't always have the opportunity to bring up children, but to lodge strangers, to wash the saints' feet, relieve the afflicted, diligently follow every good work. It's not just for women. Men should follow these qualifications. That these are the type of people that we are. You go back to Jesus washing the feet like we talked about this morning, the humility that he showed to these people. He's asking not just showing it to your enemies. Paul's saying show it to the people that you're supposed to love the most, your brethren. Have you washed the saints' feet? Have you lodged strangers, people you didn't know, but you tried to meet and take care of them? Have you relieved the afflicted? You saw someone who was in trouble and you ran and you took care of that problem. Were you the type of person who diligently follows every good work? You're known for good works. That's the type of people that we want to be, and that's the type of people that Paul's describing. Interesting in this, if you're going to support a widow over 60 that meets all these qualifications, you're supporting her because she cannot work and she cannot make money on her own, right? This is what we're going to. She can't farm. She can't make money on her own. She's not able to do that, especially in their time period here. What do you got to do? Well, she has to depend on God. That's all that she's got in this situation. Being that she can't work, however, looking at the things we just described, is this woman, though, working? Is she working? Yeah, she's working hard. She's working real hard. And I think this is the type of woman that everyone in the congregation looks at. And we have women here that are like this. And we go, you know what? I owe them a lot. They've done a lot for me. When I was afflicted, this woman, she came and she helped me. When I was a stranger and I didn't know anybody, this woman came and got me. And she said, hey, you come over to my house and I'm going to feed you and I'm going to take care of you. When I was hurting, this is the woman that came and she washed my feet. This is a woman that's known for good works. This woman's already working. And it almost seems logical why God's trying to support her in this way. She's already working for the group. She might as well be taken care of by the group as well, right? And you see that in the qualifications here. And I really like that about it. Something we all should aspire to. The second thing is you see the problems that come with honoring the widows. Those that aren't really widows, as Paul calls. Verse 11, he says, but refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry. having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully, for some have already turned aside after Satan. So now you have problems here for younger widows that are under 60. This is like the only one number we see in the New Testament for an age importance, and I just messed it up. It's 60. For women that are under 60, to kind of rephrase, here's the problem that he says, and I put the ESV up here, because we usually don't use the word wanton anymore. Verse 11 in ESV says, but refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry. And then it can start causing problems. The first problem that we see here is that if you have a woman that's being supported by the church like these women over 60 are, they might want to get married one day. And it becomes a problem because they can get remarried. Some of them might be still young, they can have children, and they can live lives this way. However, if they're being supported by the church and they have the opportunity to get married, is that going to cause a bind? Is that going to cause a problem? I think it is. And I think Paul says it is. That you have the situation where I'm actually living off the church. I'm living off this group, but I want to get married. As soon as I get married, they're no longer going to support me anymore because I'm not a widow. And you can kind of see the problems that would cause a woman in that situation. So what Paul does is he just solves the problem. He says, if you're under 60, you don't apply anymore. It causes too many problems. The younger women, he says, you have the opportunity to still get married. And if you desire to get married, guess what? You can go get married, right? And that's the benefit of having this command. There's another problem. The other problem is that they could end up idle. And this is the problem for any of us that have downtime. And if you have a woman that's being younger, that's being supported wrongfully from the church like this, she's not having to work. She's not having to work with her husband. She's not having to raise children maybe. What is she going to do all day? Paul says it here. He says, verse 13, and besides they learn to be idle, wandering from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. When we become idle, in all situations, we give more opportunities to become gossips, to become busybodies, and just get up to no good, don't we? Because we're not doing anything. I remember being little and having my bicycle. And on my street, there was several friends that lived down here. I had my friend Blake and my friend Taylor, and they all lived down the street. Over the summer vacation, before I started working, before I could drive, was out of school, you know what I did? I just walked around from house to house. I go to my house, then I go to Blake's house, and I walk into Taylor's house, go down to Summer Lane, and I go see Caleb and see what Caleb was doing. And what we usually do, us boys, little bitty boys trying to find something to do idle, we usually get into trouble. Or we would usually end up hurt after Caleb suggested that we try to jump over his pool with his ramp on our bicycles. We have those kind of ideas when we're idle, not usually the smartest ideas. And you think about this as a general sense right here. When we become idle, what are we going to be up to? What are you doing every day? When you wake up in the morning, us that maybe aren't working anymore, are you getting busy? Are you finding an opportunity to go do good? Are you meeting someone? Are you visiting the sick? Are you doing something like that? Or are you just watching TV? What are you doing every day? And the problem is the more idle we are, the more opportunities we give Satan. And the more opportunities we get into no good. To continue this thought, this is what he says about it. He says you need to give busy because you want to give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. If you have a different version there, some of them say, give no opportunity to Satan to slander your name. There's two ways that I took this concept. One was the one we already talked about, which is the more opportunities, the more free time you have when you're not really doing anything, Satan has an opportunity to cause you conflict. And he has the opportunity to lay more traps for you and try to trap you up in your own sin, right? The other way I saw this, because it says the adversary to speak reproachfully or to speak slander about you, is the way I see Job in chapter 1. So in Job chapter 1, you have Satan that comes up, and God brings up Job, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan slanders Job. Satan says, well, Lord, if you didn't put this hedge around Job, he'd curse you to your face. So he says something wrongful about Job, doesn't he? He slanders him. And I wonder if this is what Paul's alluding to here in chapter 5. That if you're the type of person that's idle, and you're the type of person that just walks house to house, and you're the type of person that isn't doing anything all day, you're not finding any way to do good or to get busy, what can Satan say about you to God if he comes and he meets him in the way that he did in Job? Well, look at Andrew. He's promising that he does all these things. He tells people he's doing all these things all week. He ain't doing anything. Look at him. He's watching TV. He's up to no good. He's on the computer. He's just doing nothing all day. Well, what is your good servant Andrew doing? He's not doing anything. And I believe that Satan can slander your name if you're not busy doing good works. And I see that in verse 14. And I feel like it could go both ways, but you can see the problem with being idle here in 11 through 15. Going to the next one. Finally, we're in number 2, honor the church, and these are going to go a lot by faster, not as much information on them. Verse 14, we see the problems connecting honoring the widows to honoring the church. 14, he says to pick up again, he says, therefore I desire that the younger women marry, bear children, manage the house, and give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some have already turned aside after Satan. If any believing man or woman has widows, and there if you see that possession, if a believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. A really important line here. So now we've not talked about the widows as much, but now we're turning to the church's responsibilities. Here in verse 16, he says, if you're a believing man or woman, you're not worse than an unbeliever, right? You are a believer. If you're a believing man or woman and you have a widow, if you have a widow that's in your circle, it is your responsibility to relieve them. The reason why you do this is so the church will not be burdened. The church already has a lot of weight on it, and if you can relieve that weight, that's good. That's really good. Now, why are we trying to relieve the church's burdens here in verse 16? It's the next phrase. That they may relieve those who are really widows. So if you think about an extreme situation, you have 25 widows at a congregation. And if all 25 of them are being supported by the local group, what kind of support or resources is this group going to have left over to support other widows? It's not. There's just not going to be that existence, right? And this is the problem he says here. So what we can do is we can have those people that we can support and those people that we can relieve personally. We free up the church's resources, number one, to actually find out widows that don't have anybody that we actually can take care of. So if we're able to share the burden this way, we don't burden the church, and we're able to put that burden on ourselves, a weight that we can manage that we don't have to put on the church. Now, it goes the second way as well. And if we go back to chapter 3, we see that the church already has a large burden on it. The church already has a job, and that job is described in 3:14 through 16. If we just read that going backwards, after giving the qualifications of the elders in verse 15, Paul's worried about being delayed, but he says it's okay because I write to you so that you may know how to ought to conduct yourself in the house of God. This is our key phrase, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. The church's responsibility, this is our burden as a church, is to be the pillar and the ground of the truth. Meaning that the ground is the foundation of the church. The pillars are us, I believe, and we have truth. We didn't come up with this truth. God gave us this truth. And after He's given us this truth, it is our job to hold it up and to be the ground and the pillar of the truth. And almost everything we do fits into this right here. Why do we edify the body? Because we are the pillar and the ground of the truth. We have to teach the truth. We have to preach the truth. We have to live the truth. Why do we evangelize? Because we are the pillar and the ground of the truth. And the whole world's out there, and the only way they're going to see the truth is if we hold it up for all to see. The truth is heavy. And the majority of our resources in the local church go towards what? The truth. The truth being preached, the truth being taught, the truth having a place to be preached and taught. It's all about the truth, and it is heavy. Now, think about this. You have widows, as Paul says, that aren't really widows, ones that don't meet in the number. And you start putting that weight on already the truth there. What happens? It gets heavier. What if we just start supporting things that God never gave us authority to support? What happens then? It gets heavier. And when I think about honor and I see about the way that churches usually run today, the world as churches run, it's all about now taking my responsibilities and not me relieving the church from my responsibilities, but it's all about the church relieving my responsibilities. I have responsibility to take care of my mother. I have responsibility to take care of my grandmother. Well, if I can put that responsibility on the church, what do I get? I get some free time. And guys, it's snowballed. I'm supposed to raise my children. I'm supposed to teach and educate my children. You know what? I can just put that responsibility on the church. And I can find a church that has a school attached to it, and the church will now meet that responsibility. I'm supposed to watch my children. I'm supposed to take care of them throughout the day. You know what I can do? I can join a church that has a daycare, and now the church will hold that responsibility. You know what? I'm supposed to have friends, and I'm supposed to be social. You know what I can do? I can go find a church that will meet that responsibility for me. And it never ends. And I'm telling you, the more and more responsibilities that we're putting on the pillars in the ground that's supposed to hold the truth, you get to the point either the pillars collapse because they can't hold it anymore, or you get to the point where the pillars go, you know what? It'd be a lot easier if I just remove the truth. And then I can't hold all these things. And that's what happens. And that's what I see in verse 16. We have to honor our widows. We have to honor the people in the world that we need to take care of. But we also have to honor the church's responsibilities. And that number one there here is honor the truth. What's the truth? The truth is the next passage in verse 16, chapter 3. God was manifested in flesh. He was justified in the Spirit. He was seen by angels. He was preached among the Gentiles, believed upon the world, received up in glory. There's a great summary about what the truth is. Really the story of Jesus and the gospel, right? Going back to our original thought, that was number two. Number one was honor the widows, honor the church. The next one he talks about is honoring the elders. Let's read verse 17 in chapter 5. It says, "Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in word and doctrine. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except for 2 or 3 witnesses. Those who are sinning rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest may fear." He actually says here, let the elder who rule be counted worthy of double honor. Not just one honor, double honor. And I think he's bringing out this point. You're going to have elders often, especially here in Ephesus perhaps, that are going to labor in the word of the Bible teaching and the preaching, and they're going to labor in word and in doctrine. And he says, when he says going to the next thing, he gives this parable, right? He gives the scripture which says, if you have an ox, don't muzzle it while it's working. Let it eat. And let it eat something of what it's working from. Basically what I think he's saying here is that you have the right to support an elder, to financially support an elder if they're laboring in word and doctrine in this way. And that's why they bestow this double honor. As well, you just say in general, an elder deserves honor. They're in that position. We as a group appointed them in that position. We're supposed to revere them and meet our responsibility towards them. That's their role. They can't do their job unless we honor them. If we didn't respect our elders, if we didn't revere our elders, if we didn't take care of them and meet their needs, are they going to be able to do their job? No, and we're going to be sheep without a shepherd just running around, aren't we? So in that situation, they can't even do their job unless we bestow on them on this honor. To give another example he gives is don't receive an accusation against an elder except for 2 or 3 witnesses. And this goes along with this honor thought. If someone comes up to you and says, Mr. So-and-so, one of our elders, I saw them do this. First thing I always say, well, did you go talk to them about it? Well, no, I was just going to tell you. Number one, if we have this passage, if you don't have 2 or 3 witnesses, you don't have a case for them. And this is what it's really clear, and it simply says, do not receive an accusation against an elder except for 2 or 3 witnesses. If it's your word versus his word, the elder has double honor. And it's something to think about when we're in these situations, and hopefully we never end up in these situations, but it's something that we need to remind ourselves of. As well, it says this, I get so upset. Why do some of y'all come and tell me on other people? I don't understand that. And I still don't understand why I hear about the elders. I hear about some people are going to them, and they go and they're telling on people without ever going to talk to the person that did the thing. Why is that happening? Why is it still happening? It was happening 2,000 years ago, and it's still happening. If y'all have a problem with someone, who do you need to go talk to? Go talk to them and fix it and be helpful. The other person you can go talk to about it is who? You can go talk to God about it. And those are two great people that need to be the first people we talk to about. It's a problem in Ephesus. It was a problem 2,000 years ago, and it's a problem here. But think about this. Let's show honor not only to the elders, but also to our own brethren. Show honor to God's word as he's commanded us to do these things. This is my final one. Honor your masters. Hayden already read this for us. Go into chapter 6. Verse 1, let as many bondservants are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and his doctrine may not be blasphemed. And those who are believing masters, let them not despise them because they are brethren, but rather serve them because those who are benefited are believers and beloved. Teach and exhort these things. To break it down again, we have to honor our masters for bondservants. Honor our bosses if we're in that situation. We need to honor the people that are above us. The reason why is so that the name of God and the doctrine may not be blasphemed. People know that you're a Christian and people know who you belong to, and you're rude to your master, you're rude to your employer, you're rude to the one who has authority over you. What does that say about God? Well, they blaspheme God because they think God is you. And you're a poor, pitiful excuse for God, especially when you're living this way, aren't we? He says in the next thing, what if your master is a believer? What if your employer, what is the one who has authority in you in the world, is also a fellow brother or sister in Christ? How do you handle that? Well, he says, don't take advantage of them, but instead rather serve them. Sometimes we get in these situations when we get business deals with each other or we're working for each other in some way. We start taking advantage of each other and we move a little slower and we're slower to pay someone back. Maybe we're slower to give something back that we've borrowed. And we do that because, well, they're my brother or my sister. They'll understand. I can be a little slower. Paul here actually tells us to do the opposite. Because someone's your brother and sister, that means you actually should work harder. Because you both get to benefit. You both get to benefit because both of you are believers and beloved. You love each other. You both believe in God together. We should actually work harder for each other. We should show honor in this way. So here's chapter 5. Honor the widows. Honor the church. Honor your elders. And honor your masters. You do all those 4 things, and I add our master being God there to the point 4, you're going to do good in this life. And you're going to be able to understand honor, and you're going to be able to meet your responsibilities. Thank you for your close attention tonight. If there's anyone here that's been subject to the invitation, if there's anyone here that knows what they need to do, and they want to honor God in this way by fulfilling his commandments and obeying the gospel of Jesus Christ, we want to help you with that. If there's anyone here that doesn't understand what the gospel of Jesus Christ is, and you want to study, please come forward, and we'll talk to you, and we'll try to get a study with you. And if there's anyone here, of course, that needs the prayers of this congregation, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.